Thank you. Great. Hello. Thank you. So my name's Anika Kozlowski, and my collaborator is Dr. Rachel McQueen from the University of Alberta. And I'll be talking about our 5-year-long project and a particular part of it, which is the repair initiatives we've seen through Thrift organizations. So this is a big project called Shifting the Burden, and we're really looking at how we can develop hyperlocal solutions for secondhand clothing, particularly those that are unsellable, unwearable, and unsold, in place of exporting undesirable and unwanted secondhand clothes. So that's the whole idea, is how do we shift the burden away from others and develop solutions that we can manage ourselves locally. So our research objectives for the larger project is really to look at the practices, the challenges, and the opportunities within regional secondhand clothing diversion networks. So looking at that actual local, regional context, place-specific areas primarily within Canada, and we've done a little bit in New Zealand and expanding to US. Then we want to examine the nature of those relationships within that network. And then how can we identify geographic proximity and local collaboration? So how do all of these relationships and place specificities interact within these networks? Within Canada, we have a few, aspects to consider when we analyze the secondhand clothing economy, which is that we have these informal semi-private networks, and the same is in the US as well. So that is that secondhand clothing economies are not managed by municipalities. It's in partnership with thrift organizations. So it's this very organic network that develops. And thrift retailers are also experiencing challenges because they are the ones who are managing all of the diversion through donation or any sort of quote unquote recycling. And then this is amplified because municipalities, the message that municipalities put forward in managing textile waste or secondhand clothes is that we should donate to thrift retailers. So they don't bear any of the responsibility or provide resources, but they this is the path or the stream that they're pushing everyone towards. This puts a lot of pressure on thrift retailers because they don't really have the resources to manage all of the unsellable items that come to them, right? Not everything that is donated is good. And how can they deal with all of this excess that can't be put on their retail floor? So one of my graduate students, she did a study on the landscape of the messaging of municipal textile waste management, and we found that out of 81 municipalities, which targeted the most major municipalities in Canada, 81% mentioned donation on their website. So they have no other information or ideas or activities to propose other than donate to a thrift retailer. Those that had official programs, so by official, they actually specified that it's a textile recycling program, which was only 17%, and out of that 17, only 4% had initiatives beyond donation. So maybe for example, maybe you could repair your clothes or try cleaning them or however, turn it into rags. So very few move beyond the idea of donation. So really that's regarded as a primary solution for managing our clothing, quote unquote waste, which we know is not waste. And reuse is important for a circular economy, but there's other activities that are involved in garment longevity, such as repair, laundering, and other extended use activities that we'll discuss later on. The other issue is just how do people feel about repair? So my colleague also did a small survey with 582 Canadians. And out of those 582 Canadians, 475 have never attended a clothing repair event, only 107. And only 39 had ever previously attended any kind of repair event. So repair in general is not part of the activities that Canadians are, from this small sample, looking at when it comes to extension. So just something brief about methods. So we kind of looked at the territorial circular ecosystem framework, which is really looking at the dynamic, interconnected set of economic players, institutions, policies, and practices within a specific territory. Because we were really interested in understanding the differences between urban and rural landscapes, because that's pretty much what we have in Canada. We either have a very urban or we have very rural. And how all of these stakeholders work together. So how do they work together to optimize resource flows, reduce waste, and promote circular economy principles? And we applied this through all of our different various methods, because this is a 5-year project, so we have many like little sub-projects that are also involved. So, but most of our time is actually spent on site in thrift stores, where we sort. Before the thrift store even gets it, we take the items that are donated, we thrift through them. We go on-site tours, we do interviews, we follow the entire path from donation and then eventually actually to landfill. We do some small little pilot programs with cleaning and repairing, surveys with the thrift retailers as well, so those that we can't interview. We're up to 42 interviews within Canada that are on site where we've also sorted. We're up to 65 plus interviews, including Zoom or any follow-up from our surveys as well. When we sort, this is how we categorize everything. So we use 2 sorts of scales. So we first sort of categorize A through F. Is this in good condition, all the way to this is not good, it's contaminated, it needs to go to the landfill. We also look at the type of clothes it is, the fiber content, the fabric structure, brand, color, condition. And then we also look at what level of damage there is. So if something is not in perfect condition, what is that condition? What is the particular type of damage? We identified 2 dominant approaches to circular secondhand clothing practices, thrift store, secondhand clothing thrift store practices. This business model is important because this is where we saw particular activities, and we saw a really big difference in the types of activities. So we have centralized and decentralized. Centralized is very standardized. So these is sort of, think of your large thrift store chains. That we see the same ones all the way across the country, and they operate exactly the same. Everything that is not sold within store or can't be sold is managed externally. So they have absolutely zero autonomy about what they can do with anything that does not sell or won't sell. So there's no opportunity for local community networks or initiatives to recirculate within their own community. They have these things like daily quotas, which is pretty impactful to how they actually manage their inventory, because if you have a bad donation day, then you could inadvertently end up pulling stuff that is good off of your retail floor because you have a quota to put so much out. So this is where these centralized practices can really disrupt, because not every day is a perfect donation day, and not every day is a perfect thrifting day, as we know. So these dynamics are really exacerbated by having centralized operations such as daily quotas. But they do benefit from economies of scale, right? So they do have efficiency on their side in the sense that if exporting is also part of your business, which usually is for these larger thrift ones, then it makes sense because they can consolidate all of their unsold and unwearable merchandise, and then they can bail everything, and they have this economies of scale efficiency, right? But overall, their processes are rigid with little to no flexibility, and we have no local recirculation. Like, it doesn't keep going on and on. Decentralized. Stores are autonomous, so they run on their own, and they don't have to adhere to any sort of centralized processes from a head office, so they're highly flexible. They have strong values, and that really guides their operations. And they have a lot of community partnerships because they're run mostly with volunteers. And they really always often ask the question, what does our community need? So we found that these are the most effective at recirculating secondhand clothes because they're asking those questions. This was a quote from one of our recent interviews. "We are generously donated to, so we generously donate." And that is how they sort of address that question of what does our community need. So they have a very high volunteer to employee ratio. So they have very close ties to the community through their volunteer networks. Staff and volunteers are very passionate about textile waste, so they engage in diversion activities such as laundering and repair that would not normally happen or ever happen in larger thrift stores, or if these volunteers weren't there. And they also avoid centralized organizations for secondhand clothing. You'd be surprised how much secondhand clothing moves from thrift organizations. That one thrift organization, if they have access, they will actually sell it to another thrift organization or charity associated with the thrift organization. So they prefer to identify local and community-based solutions because they know that there's eventually an export pathway and they don't want to engage in that pathway. So just some quotes about these repairs and mending that actually happen. So oftentimes the volunteers are working there, they're working and volunteering because they're passionate about the topic. So when they see minor repairs, they're happy to engage in them, and there's specific volunteers who are known for certain types of repairs. Same with laundering. So they don't engage in laundering everything, but if they see something as high value, they will take the effort to launder that. They engage in all sorts of upcycling activities, repurposing, rags. I love the idea of a paint t-shirt collection. That's a great way of disposing of something that is would typically not be able to be sold. They cut up rags. So volunteers will take bags of these t-shirts home, they'll cut them up into rags and they'll resell them locally. So essentially, the volunteers are part of what makes this decentralized model work, and the community engagement, and they're really impactful in their recirculation by engaging in repairing, cleaning, upcycling, or downcycling. So volunteers are such a key aspect of these decentralized model. So to date, we've almost sorted over 10,000 items. And our results suggest that almost a quarter, so 24%, could be saleable through basic laundering and minor repair. And it's about over 50% that are just fine as they go in. I've followed the path all the way to Laredo, Texas, and this is where everything that doesn't sell or is unwearable ends up. They buy stuff from thrift organizations, the large national ones, and one truck is about 7 tons, and there's about 14 million pounds a week. So about 15 of those trucks. And this is a very small town. This is about 200,000 people. So we've also shifted the burden to other local areas. We're not just exporting out, but we're also exporting within our own countries. We also did a quick pilot. I'm not going to go into too much of the details, but we also picked a sample of the clothes, and a student went ahead and tried to clean and repair these clothes. Most were wash clean, minor, and major out of 970 garments that were sorted. Out of 200 items that were selected, 170 were successfully cleaned and repaired. 139 were returned and 81 confirmed sold. So if we think about that 25% and all of those clothes going to a landfill, they do have the potential with just a little bit of effort to be cleaned or easily repaired. So there is a big difference between our centralized and decentralized. And really that decentralized, they are autonomous, they're embedded in the community and the ecosystem. Their operations are guided by values and flexibility, and they have a strong sense of responsibility. And just some conclusions about what we can do. I think some of the key ones is really public communication. So what is an acceptable donation? What is not an acceptable donation? And can we also provide resources to thrift organizations to integrate minor repair or laundering activities, give them the support that they need? If we are pushing them, all the donations to them, there should be some sort of responsibility and support for them. because they don't do a lot to address textile waste management. And they could be also potentially inadvertently promoting further consumption, as we've heard from the other presentations today. How do we also prioritize garment reuse and repair? And if it's not citizens who want to be engaged, then again, can we default to thrift stores? Can we provide resources for them or work with them to increase participation? Or have any other collaborative opportunities? So getting post-secondary fashion programs or other upskilling involved through this, and having just the municipalities and other people within these communities engage in repair. So decentralized operations support successful regionalized hyperlocal secondhand clothing diversion networks through their geographical proximity and their localized collaboration and volunteer activities. And one of our key recommendations so far is just government investment or incentives in repair programs and other low cost or low technology opportunities. Thank you.
I am amazed. I did not believe that you can push 48 slides into 15 minutes. So we have 5 minutes for question, and then we're going to move on to the dinner.
Hi. I was wondering, first of all, amazing. So interesting and so many things within one research. Did you find that the different mechanisms, decentralized versus the decentralized, did you manage to do like a sum up of how much was not sold comparatively, and to show like, yeah.
Well, we're still going through all the analysis. And also just methodology has been a little bit difficult because we come in and we have our sample, and then we're not there on the day-to-day, and there's so much variation in how much is coming in and going out on a daily basis. It's hard. But based on interviews and what we saw of just their processes, I would say there's definitely more going out of decentralized, just because there's more of these activities happening, and they're holding back. So they store a lot more, and all of the other activities they do. So they're really trying to, because it costs them. So a larger thrift organization also has more funds to move stuff out and pay for different options. The smaller thrift stores don't have as much financial resources to pay for moving stuff around to other places.
The larger chains, though, are incentivized to meet their employment numbers, to meet, or I would hope, exceed. Is there, particularly in an organization like Goodwill, do you know if there's been conversation or any sort of approach to bringing in a repair program to any of these larger thrift organizations like a Goodwill to help employ people with with different skills?
I mean, it would be amazing if they did.
But do we know for a fact?
California has had small pilot programs as well with repair, but it wasn't on site. So, or maybe it was like on site with certain days.
Within a Goodwill or Salvation Army?
It was within a Goodwill. Yeah, that's the only one that I've heard of. Other than that, there's not been much exploration, but it would be a great way to support upskilling, but also have those immediate needs addressed by anyone who buys something and that, shortening a hem or something as opposed to them putting it back on the rack. Sorry, I don't know where to go. Okay.
I think Maya was before me, but okay. I was just curious to know if you partnered with any or thought about collaborations with schools, especially with a lot of like MEC or FCS programs being defunded or not prioritized, like any sort of pipeline to get youth to begin repairing and creating that culture and that skill that used to be more common.
At my old institution, because I just recently moved, That was something I was looking at, was how do we get students into some of these places to practice their repair and mending, and also give them that sort of just real life experience on what it means, like just what are all the facets of being a sustainable fashion practitioner, and how can they get involved in repair services. So yeah, but I do love the idea. I think it's great.
I was wondering, we also have in Geneva, we have a strong reliance on volunteers to sort for charity organizations, and it's become an issue because the volumes have increased dramatically. I was wondering what you think about this reliance on volunteers. Is this a sustainable solution in the long run, or if not, what would you replace it with?
That's a great question. So the big problem with volunteers, and what we found in Canada, is all of the volunteers are older, and they have the time to commit, and they're committed to a schedule, so you can rely on them to come in. And the younger generation is very interested in volunteering as well, but it's more if they're doing it for an internship, or they're doing it for credit hours, or they come in. So it's difficult for thrift stores to recruit and keep some kind of schedule of younger volunteers. So I don't think anybody has answers, and that's sort of the big question, because they really rely on volunteers and they're such an important part of the process. But the way that the new generations view volunteering is a bit different than the older generations.
Thank you very much.